Soho security or small office, home office security. In this lesson, we're going to look at different ways for additional security settings on your firewall and other type of devices that you'll use in a Soho environment. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, in your environment, you're going to have different ways of securing the devices. That could be different settings. Also, it could be the placement of your device. The physical placement of your device is very important. It's recommended to be in a secure location where authorized personnel should only have access to. And it should be a secure, well ventilated room area, etc. Sometimes you may not have the luxury of having a separate room for your critical network devices like your firewalls, storage devices, and routers. But you also want to make sure it's in a secure area if you don't have that. So that would be very important because that's the first stage of tampering is the physical access to those devices. Also, you want to change the default passwords. Default passwords for a lot of common devices through many vendors are published and they're standard for most vendors. So, not changing this is the same of not having a password at all. There's no exceptions here. This is the most basic, secure way of securing a device is changing the default passwords. Firmware updates is another one. When you purchase or secure your device, you never know how long it's been sitting on the shelf. So you want to, as soon as you put it into production or right before you put it into production, you want to make sure that you update it with the critical updates. And there's also other things that you could do to secure it, as well as changes that you need to make. Say, for instance, depending on your network environment, you may want to set a static WAN IP address. A static IP address is something that you issued from your ISP, and you may want or need a static IP address for something called port mapping, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. If you had resources on the internal network that you need to remotely to get into to view from the outside world, you would want a static IP address. Also, there's different rules you can configure to securing your network, like IP filtering. These are rules on your firewall. We'll look at that in a little bit more detail as well. Also, there's something called DHCP reservation list. DHCP or Dynamic Host Control Protocol is where the router or firewall is issuing out IP addresses for your internal network host or your internal devices. You may want to set up a DHCP reservation list to reserve an IP address for a special device. That special device could be an internal device that you're trying to get to from the outside world. So it can always have the same IP address. So let's look at firewall configuration on an open source firewall called pfSense. So this is the pfSense dashboard. First, we're going to change the default administrative password. And this may change from router to and firewall to firewall, but in the pfSense, you would do it here under the user manager. And you would go ahead and make the changes for the default passwords and change it to the password that you or your organization they may use. After you make those changes, you want to make sure you apply and save those changes, like so. So the next step here is changing the WAN IP address or the internet IP address to a static IP address. Different options. You can choose it from static. You may also have the option to choose a DHCP from getting it from the host, whether that be the router or whatever. There's also a PPTP type configuration where you'll get that from a host. But again, we want to change ours to static, and here's the IP address and all the information. We'll save that and apply those changes as well. And after those changes apply, we're going to look at some other settings. Um, the next thing we're going to look at would be the firewall rules or the IP filtering. And this is where you would set up your firewall rules. You would hit add to add a new rule. And there's different information that you can put in about this rule and what applications can get to and what applications cannot be getting to by remote users. Also, we're going to look at port forwarding. To port forward, you're going to have a open up a port from the outside to an internal host. And again, this will be set up on different ways and different routers. This is how you do it on the PFSense router. Different information that you'll put in, like the single host IP address, what ports you'll use, what ports will be open, and the firewall will open up a port directly to that particular device. In the DHCP server settings, not only can you set up the DHCP range, but you can also go down and set up a DHCP reservation list right here. So again, if you had devices that boot up, they will always get the same IP address. Static mappings for your DHCP. Other settings and changes that you can provide in your firewall. A screen subnet or the DMZ. This is a segmented network between the external and internal places of the network. There's a host that needs internet presence but prevents access to the internal network. Web servers and other type of devices that need presence on the internet but don't want to give them access to the internal. You would set up a DMZ, and a DMZ is like actually it comes from a military term, a demilitarized zone. We looked at IP filtering before, but IP filtering is done with firewall rules, and this helps secure the internal network. Explicitly allows a certain application with an implicit deny for anything else. Meaning, if I was going to allow access into the network, I would explicitly allow just this particular application coming through the specific port. Anything other than the application would be denied. Port forwarding, what we looked at as far as those rules on that one, port forwarding again allows external access through a particular port to an internal host. Traffic can be in, out, or both directions, in and out. Say, for instance, if you didn't want to do a port forward or you have to do a lot of port forwarding, you may want to use universal plug and play, UPnP. This network protocol allows for automatic port forwarding. Most modern firewalls have this feature, and the client initiates the connection and the firewall opens the port automatically. So, again, if you're doing a lot of port forwarding, this may be a protocol that you could utilize in your firewall. Also, when you're working with your firewall, you want to disable ports that may be running or services that may be running on host on the net on the in the network. Disabling a network service that's not required is a safe way to guarantee that you don't have malicious attackers probing your network trying to get in. This also um, reduces your surface attack for an open door for attackers and ways to get into your network. Content filtering is another utility that can help you. It restricts users from accessing and viewing certain sites and materials. There's two types of content filtering. You can do it by URL, block a URL, specifically HTTP // www.google.com. You would put that in, and that URL would be blocked. You can have a list of URLs that can be blocked, or you can do content based blocking. And this is based on content that a viewer may come across on a website or see on a website. You'll see a lot of these content based in organizations because these may be based on images or text. This could be in line with the security policy preventing users from going to certain type of websites with certain type of non-related materials, media, and so forth. This could also be set up in a subscription basis. Wireless settings. When you have a wireless router in a Soho network, you want to make sure that you change the service set identifier, the SSID. You don't want to default of Linksys or D-Link or whatever that wireless broadcast name is. Change it from the default to whatever the organization you use, whatever you choose to use. And also, you may want to choose to change this periodically. Sometimes you may have an employee that left the business that knows what that SSID is and have an idea what the passwords they were used. So you may want to change that frequently. Another way of staying one step ahead of the bad guys. Disable guest access. Now, if visitors to your location will not be using the wireless, then disable it. There's no way to keep that, no reason to keep that open. Um, to keep from outsiders and disable the broadcast on this as well. Encryption settings are very key and very important to protecting your environment. Choose the strongest level of encryption, WPA2 or WPA3. If you have an enterprise, the enterprise may want to set up WPA with 802.1x with a radius server authentication. We talked about that previously in another lesson. Also, you want to dig down a little bit and look at the different frequencies and channels for your wireless. 2.4 and 5 gigahertz are mainly the most popular type of wireless frequencies that you'd use in a network. Now, the 2.4, it's longer but less bandwidth, so it has more propagation. 802.11b, G, and N, where 2.4 operates on the 2.4 gigahertz frequency. Now, 2.4 has um, 14 channels that are 22 megahertz wide. Now, in the US, we only use the first 11 channels. Now, and also of those 11 channels, there are called prime channels. These are channels that don't overlap. Those prime channels are 1, 6, and 11 because they're so distant and spaced apart, they don't overlap with one another. So if you were in an area with a lot of congestion and you wanted a clean channel to lock your wireless devices in, you would probably choose one of those instead of using 2 and 3 and 4. You would use 1 and 6 and 11. 5 gigahertz, on the other hand, is a shorter range, but it's more bandwidth. 802.11a or 5 gigahertz operates on the 5 gigahertz frequency. And this band has 25 non overlapping channels. And we can function on the 12 channels. And those are the channels listed there: 36, 40, 44, 48, 52, 56, 60, 64, 149, 153, 157, and 161. However, 802.11 AC uses 25 channels. In this lesson, we looked at, again, other ways to secure your network, specifically the Soho network, the small office, home office network. We looked at different settings for your router and firewalls, basic settings, changes that you need to make, like changing default passwords. We looked at IP filtering and other enhancements you can do on your firewall. We looked at wireless, a little bit more detail on wireless, different channels and frequencies, and also other firewall settings. I want to thank you for joining me for this lesson, and I will see you in the next lesson.